funded their $750K house and luxury lifestyle, but at my brother's party. At 35, I stood in that gleaming ballroom, champagne flute trembling in my hand, and spoke 7 words that would shatter 2 decades of silence. To the ATM who just shut down permanently. The room didn't just go quiet, it crystallized into something fragile and sharp. What happened next taught me the most profound lesson about human nature I've ever learned. Hey everyone, I'm David, and if you've lived long enough, you know that some moments arrive like earthquakes, sudden, devastating, reshaping everything you thought you understood about the people closest to you. This is the story of how one toast at my brother's engagement party became the moment I finally stopped financing other people's delusions about love. I grew up in what looked like the perfect upper-middle-class family in Westchester. My older brother Marcus was 37, the golden constellation around which our entire family orbited. 6'2", effortlessly charismatic, the kind of man who could walk into any room and instantly become its gravitational center. Every achievement of his became a family shrine: lacrosse trophies, debate team ribbons, even his failed attempts at screenwriting were celebrated like Academy Awards on our mantelpiece. Then there was me, the quiet architect of code and pixels, preferring algorithms to athletics, finding poetry in programming languages rather than pep rallies. I wasn't rebellious, I was simply invisible, existing in the shadows cast by Marcus's brilliance. My mother would say, with that particular mixture of love and bewilderment that only parents possess, David's just wired differently. My father's contribution was even more devastating in its casual dismissal. He'll figure out his path eventually. Eventually, as it turned out, arrived much sooner than they expected. By 19, while Marcus was still collecting participation trophies in his 3rd year of community college, I was already building something revolutionary. I developed a cybersecurity algorithm in high school that caught the attention of venture capitalists who didn't care about my age, only about my ability to solve problems they couldn't even articulate. When I told my father I was considering skipping the traditional university route to focus on building my startup, his response cut deeper than any physical wound. "That's not a career, David. That's just expensive daydreaming." Then he returned to watching Marcus play Grand Theft Auto with the intensity of a proud father observing his son's Nobel Prize acceptance speech. So I moved out at 20. Not in anger. Anger requires acknowledgement, but in pure survival mode. I rented a basement apartment in Queens where the ceiling leaked ambition and the walls whispered with possibility. I lived on instant ramen and determination, coding 18-hour days, consulting for companies that needed digital miracles, building and testing and failing and rebuilding until my fingers knew keyboards better than prayer. By 25, I had developed a blockchain security protocol that revolutionized fintech. By 28, I had founded NexusGuard Technologies. By 32, I was worth $47 million. The beautiful irony? I kept it all meticulously quiet. Same Honda Accord, same vintage hoodies, same small apartment, now by choice rather than necessity. But beneath that carefully maintained facade of modest living, I had built an empire entirely with my own hands. And then, for the first time in years, my family called. It started innocently enough, the way emotional extortion always does. "Hey David, Dad's BMW is making that noise again. You know how expensive German car repairs are." Then it was Marcus. "Bro, rent's brutal this month, and you know how tough the creative industry is right now." Mom needed a new MacBook Pro for her interior design consultancy. Dad wanted to upgrade to a Tesla Model S. Marcus needed his credit cards paid off, again. I said yes. Every single time. Not because I believed money could purchase their love, but because somewhere in my soul, I still carried that invisible 19-year-old who desperately wanted to matter to them. So I quietly became their silent benefactor, their invisible foundation. I paid off their $750,000 mortgage in Scarsdale. I cleared Marcus's $28,000 in credit card debt. I bought Dad his Tesla, gave Marcus a leased BMW X5, covered utilities, holidays, birthdays, emergencies real and imagined. But here's the thing about being someone's financial lifeline: you're essential but never actually included. I was still the afterthought at family dinners, still the one whose achievements were met with polite nods while Marcus's latest screenplay pitch received standing ovations. I wasn't family. I was just the one keeping their lifestyle inflated. Then came the evening that would teach me the most expensive lesson about human dignity. Marcus and his fiancée Isabella had invited me to what they described as an intimate engagement celebration. They'd gotten engaged 6 months earlier, a proposal I'd indirectly funded through the $15,000 ring allowance I'd quietly transferred to Marcus's account. This was supposed to be a cozy gathering with both families at the Union Club in Manhattan, 22 people celebrating their upcoming union. I arrived carrying a custom engraved Waterford crystal champagne set and a bottle of Dom Perignon 2010, $800 of congratulations wrapped in silk and good intentions. I'd even bought a new Tom Ford suit, gotten a proper haircut, the whole performance of belonging. The evening began with that familiar rhythm of upper-class social theater. Conversations about summer houses in the Hamptons, debates about whether the new wine bar in Tribeca was worth the hype, polite inquiries about careers that nobody really listened to the answers for. I wore my practice smile, made appropriate small talk, and waited for my moment to belong. Then Marcus stood up, his champagne flute catching the chandelier light like a weapon. "I want to make a toast," he announced, and the room settled into that expectant hush that precedes either poetry or disaster. His eyes swept the assembled group before landing on me with laser precision. "Here's to family," he began, and my heart actually lifted for a moment, thinking perhaps this would be the moment of acknowledgement I'd been unconsciously craving for decades. Except for David, the antisocial robot who thinks his bank account makes him worth something. The laughter that followed wasn't kind. It was the sharp, knowing laughter of people who had found someone safe to ridicule, someone whose humiliation cost them nothing. My mother, my own mother, threw back her head and laughed like Marcus had delivered the punchline to the greatest joke she'd ever heard. My father chuckled and shook his head with that familiar expression of disappointed resignation. Isabella looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Her family exchanged glances that said everything about what they thought of this display. But nobody, not one person in that room, stood up for me. I sat there in my expensive suit, holding my expensive congratulations, feeling something fundamental shift inside my chest like tectonic plates realigning. The oxygen seemed to thin, the chandelier light grew sharper, and for the first time in my 35 years, I saw the situation with crystalline clarity. Without conscious thought, I stood up, I raised my own champagne flute, and in a voice steadier than I felt, I said, to the ATM who just shut down permanently. The transformation was immediate and absolute. Champagne flutes froze halfway to lips. Conversations died mid-syllable. Even the background jazz seemed to pause in respectful attention to what had just occurred. I set down my glass with the deliberate precision of a man who had finally understood the rules of the game he'd been unknowingly playing for decades. I put on my coat, picked up my crystal gift set, and walked out of that ballroom, out of that club, out of their version of what family means. That's it. No dramatic speeches, no door slamming, no final confrontations. Just me, finally done performing for an audience that saw me as nothing more than a revenue stream with emotions. I got in my Honda and drove through Manhattan with no destination, no music, just the sound of my own breathing and the distant hum of a city that suddenly felt full of possibility instead of obligation. Halfway across the Queensboro Bridge, my phone started its frantic symphony of notifications. "Marcus, dude, what the hell was that about?" "Mom, that was completely inappropriate, David. You embarrassed your brother on his special night." "Dad, time to grow up and learn to take a joke." I didn't answer. Instead, I spent that evening doing something I should have done years earlier. I called my lawyer, my accountant, and my bank. The next morning, I began the systematic process of removing myself from their financial lives. The mortgage I'd been covering. Payments stopped. House returned to their responsibility. Marcus's BMW lease transferred from my account to his name, repossessed within the week when he couldn't make the payment. The family phone plan that covered all their devices disconnected. The emergency fund I'd maintained for their various crises liquidated. The monthly allowances I'd been quietly sending terminated. I sent Marcus one text, "Hope Isabella enjoys public transportation." Then I did something revolutionary. I went completely silent. The aftermath unfolded like a masterclass in human psychology. Within hours, Marcus had posted a rambling Facebook manifesto about how money corrupts people and how some individuals forget their roots the moment they achieve success. He tagged our parents, creating this united front narrative where I was the villain who had abandoned his loving family for material obsessions. I didn't respond online or privately. For the first time in my life, I became a spectator to their chaos instead of its primary funding source. Within 10 days, the financial reality hit them like a perfectly calculated economic earthquake. The utilities at my parents' Scarsdale house were disconnected until they scrambled to establish new accounts in their own names. The lifestyle they'd become accustomed to, dinners at Le Bernardin, weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard, shopping sprees at Bergdorf's, suddenly contracted to what they could actually afford on Dad's consulting income and Mom's sporadic interior design clients. I received one voice message from my father that I saved before blocking his number. "This is childish, David. You're punishing your mother because your feelings got hurt. Be a man and get over it." The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. For the first time in my adult life, I was being exactly the man I needed to be. But not everyone saw it Marcus's way. My cousin Rachel reached out during the second week. "That toast was disgusting, David." I wanted to say something but didn't want to make the scene worse. "You didn't deserve that humiliation." "I'm sorry," we all just sat there. Another cousin simply texted, "Not all of us are like them." That took courage. These quiet voices of support mattered more than I expected. They reminded me that sometimes the people who truly see you are the ones standing at the edges of the storm, not in its eye. Then, 3 weeks after that toast heard round the family, I received a message that made me believe in human decency again. Isabella wrote, "David, I should have spoken up that night. I didn't. And that's my failure as a human being. I've been thinking about what happened, about the way Marcus spoke to you, about how your parents reacted. It's not just about one dinner, it's about a pattern I've been trying to ignore. The way he talks about you when you're not around isn't much better than what you heard that night. I'm calling off the engagement. I'm sorry, I couldn't see clearly sooner. Take care." I stared at that message for a long time, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years, relief for another person. Relief that she had seen what I'd been living with for decades. I wrote back the next day, "No apology needed, Isabella." That took incredible courage. "I hope you find someone who sees your worth without needing to diminish anyone else's." She liked the message. We never spoke again, but I often wonder if she found what she was looking for. Over the following months, I watched from my carefully constructed distance as their world adjusted to reality. Marcus moved back into our childhood bedroom in Scarsdale after losing his third temp job of the year. Apparently, his resume looked like a case study in professional instability when it wasn't being subsidized by invisible wealth. His pattern had been consistent for years. 6 months of enthusiasm followed by conflicts with management, followed by mysterious departures that were always someone else's fault. Without my financial buffer, my parents' true economic situation became visible. Dad's consulting work was sporadic. Mom's interior design business existed more as a social hobby than actual income. The house they'd been living in, the lifestyle they'd been maintaining, the casual luxury they'd grown accustomed to, all of it had been an elaborate theater production funded by my silent generosity. For the first time in my life, I wasn't shrinking to accommodate their comfort. Instead, I was growing into spaces I'd never allowed myself to occupy. I started seeing a therapist, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand the architecture of the relationships that had defined my first 35 years. Dr. Sarah Chen helped me realize that boundaries aren't cruelty, that silence isn't always peace, and that no amount of money will ever purchase respect from people who've already decided you're not worthy of it. I adopted a rescue dog named Newton, a brilliant border collie who had been returned to the shelter 3 times for being too intelligent and requiring too much mental stimulation. We understood each other immediately. I started painting again, something I'd abandoned in college when Marcus made a joke about my artistic phase that landed like a precision-guided missile to my confidence. I took a solo trip to New Zealand, spent 3 weeks hiking through landscapes so beautiful they made me understand why people write poetry. Every step felt like peeling away a layer of accumulated pain I hadn't realized I'd been carrying since childhood. Then, exactly 13 months after that toast, I received a handwritten letter in my mailbox. No return address, but I recognized my mother's careful cursive immediately. David, you've made your point. We understand you were hurt. But you can't just abandon your family because of one misunderstanding. Blood is blood. You're still our son. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. I never responded, because here's what I'd learned in those 13 months of silence. Blood is biology, but family is behavior. And they had never chosen to behave like family toward me. The letter revealed everything I needed to know about their understanding of what had happened. In their version of events, I had overreacted to a harmless joke. In their narrative, I was the dramatic one who couldn't take some gentle ribbing. They had rewritten history to make themselves comfortable, turning my moment of finally seeing clearly into my moment of inexplicable sensitivity. But I didn't need them to understand anymore. I didn't need them to acknowledge the years of dismissal, the casual cruelty, the way they had turned me into a financial resource rather than a family member. I had stopped needing their validation the moment I walked out of that ballroom. I haven't spoken to any of them since. I'm certain they've constructed an entire mythology around my disappearance. David, the son who chose money over family, the brother who abandoned his roots for his bank account. They probably tell people I'm going through some kind of midlife crisis, that success went to my head, that I'll come around eventually when I realize what really matters. But here's what I realize matters. I live in a converted lighthouse in Montauk now, where the ocean provides a soundtrack of endless possibility, and the horizon reminds me daily that there's always more world than the one you grew up believing was complete. I run Nexus Guard from my home office, where Newton lies at my feet and original paintings cover the walls where Marcus's achievements used to hang in our childhood home. I donate substantial amounts to organizations that support overlooked kids, the quiet ones, the different ones, the ones whose talents don't fit traditional molds of success. I mentor young entrepreneurs who remind me of my 19-year-old self, brilliant, hungry, and convinced they're invisible. Marcus, last I heard through the family grapevine, is working part-time at a Best Buy in White Plains and living in our childhood bedroom. He's 38 now, still telling people about the screenplays he's going to write, still blaming external circumstances for internal failures. He still tells people I abandoned the family, but abandonment suggests leaving something that was there to begin with. What I did was stop funding an illusion. That night when I raised my glass and spoke those 7 words, to the ATM who just shut down permanently, I wasn't being cruel. I was finally being honest. I was acknowledging what I had been to them all along. Not a son, not a brother, but a financial convenience with inconvenient emotions. I used to desperately want a seat at their table, to be included in their version of what family means. Now I sit at my own table, in my lighthouse kitchen, with Newton at my feet and the Atlantic Ocean stretching toward infinite possibilities outside my windows. When I pour myself wine now, I toast something different, not because I won some battle, but because I finally stopped fighting a war that was designed to be unwinnable. The most profound lesson I learned isn't about money or family or success. It's about the difference between being needed and being valued. For 35 years, I was desperately needed to fund their lifestyle, needed to absorb their dismissal, needed to remain small so they could feel large. But I was never valued for who I actually was beneath the financial utility. Now, at 36, I've learned to value myself in ways that have nothing to do with my bank account and everything to do with my capacity for joy, creativity, and peace. I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop enabling people to treat you poorly. I've learned that walking away isn't giving up, it's growing up. If you've lived long enough, you know that some relationships are seasonal. They serve a purpose, teach you something essential, and then naturally conclude. Others are meant to last forever but require radical transformation to survive. The hardest lesson is learning to distinguish between the two and having the courage to act accordingly. That toast changed everything because it was the moment I stopped translating my worth through other people's inability to see it. It was the moment I realized that being family isn't about shared DNA, it's about shared respect, shared support, shared celebration of each other's authentic selves. Some of you watching this might be sitting in your own version of that ballroom right now, wondering if you're overreacting to treatment that feels wrong but looks acceptable from the outside. Some of you might be funding relationships that don't actually include you. Some of you might be invisible in the lives of people who should see you most clearly. What I want you to know is this: your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to see your worth. Your contributions don't become meaningless because they're not acknowledged. Your decision to stop accepting less than you deserve isn't selfish, it's necessary. The toast that ended everything was actually the beginning of everything that mattered. Sometimes the most profound change requires the simplest words, spoken with the clarity that only comes from finally understanding who you are when you stop trying to be who others need you to be. I'm David, and this is what I learned about the difference between being needed and being loved. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear about your own moments of clarity in the comments below. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is share our truth and discover we're not alone in experiences that felt impossibly isolating. And if you found value in this story, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. We never know who might be sitting in their own ballroom, holding their own champagne flute, gathering the courage to finally speak their truth.